where it comes from, in a sense, in terms of what it assumes. It assumes that all the halachas of the Torah are realities, number one, and therefore, in order to know them, you've got to explain them, which means to understand what the fundamental sub-realities are of each one. That's essentially what we've described up to now. This week we will describe the method in general, in the method itself, how it works, what we do. But I'm not going to go too specific, just in general, just in more of a general way. And then next week we will talk about. Okay. Now, how does the method work? Okay, how does it work? I mean, it sounds very ambitious. How does it actually work? Well, it's really very simple. No.
It sounds simple.
It really is simple. But I tell you honestly, the method itself is it's not difficult, but becoming proficient in the method is really achieving distant states of being. It's really what it is. That's why it's difficult, because and you will only understand it when you achieve the thing. It's a different levels of being. It's a level of mind. That's really what it is. It's a different level of sensitivity to the innate processes behind ideas. That's what it is. How does it work? How does it work? Okay, let's take a mashal. Imagine a building, okay? But there are no bricks to this building. I don't know if I gave this mashal once before. I did, but I'm going to go into more detail. Imagine you have a full building, a skyscraper, and a small skyscraper that's visible in the eye, right? And you've got all the beams there, and there are no bricks, right? There are no bricks, there are no outer coverings. You just see the frame of the building standing there, no wires. Nothing's been put in except for the frame, essentially, okay? When you look at that building, okay, you notice some interesting things. You see, first of all, that the building is composed of beams, right? Metal girders, different shapes and sizes, all put together. Now, when you analyze the construction of that building, you see the following. Well, first of all, what is the building? What is the object of all these metal beams? What are they doing? So you say, well, a building essentially is a conglomeration or collection of girders, arranged in a certain way, right, so that the entire edifice is supported against the force of gravity. Basically, that's what a building is.
Wouldn't describe it this way, but that's what it is.
Yeah, essentially that's what it is. So, the fundamental purpose, therefore, of the entire building is to keep itself up. To create a structure which remains standing. In order to do it, that building is composed of many beams. Yeah, many different beams. Okay? So, we have the objective.
There's a different color here.
We have the objective. Okay? The objective of the building. Number one. The second thing we have, what is the building made of? It's made of metal beams. So we have the components. Okay? We look at the components and we see that the components are arranged in a certain way. Right? So we have the structural arrangements, or pattern. Okay? These are so therefore, if I want to understand how a building is constructed, I say to myself, one, what is the tachlis of this thing? Number two, what are its components? What is it made of? And number three, how are the components fitted together, or placed together, or arranged together, so that they fulfill the objective? Right? That's essentially what it is. Now, so let's say I want to answer this question. What are the components? Well, I look at each beam, right? I look at the beam, and I see, well, what is the beam made of? I ask myself, what is a metal beam? first of all, what is it made of? What kind of material is it made of? You know, steel, alloy, titanium, whatever. What is it made of? What is its material aspect? Number two, how is it shaped or designed? You see, it's another thing I want to know about it. And many other properties or qualities that I want to know each beam. And I say, I want to know that about each beam. So, let's say there are 500 beams in the building. Beam 1, there's beam 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each you want to give me a number. I say to myself, let's analyze, right, the materials and the shape of each beam. Beam number 1 is composed of the following material. It's shaped like this. Beam 2, beam 3, beam 4, beam 499, beam 500. Right? We understand that? So, there are 500 beams, right? And what I want to know are the characteristics, right, of each beam. You know, to create the component, where it's created in the factory, you know, where they make these things.
The essence of it.
What?
The essence of it.
Now, once I know how the beams are done, I think to myself, well, how are they arranged? How are they put together? What is the structure of the thing? Now, when I look at how they're arranged, I see a very important thing. I see some of those beams hold up the entire building. You see. As far as the structure is concerned, they are of primary importance. There are other beams which don't hold up the building, they simply connect one beam to another. They are of secondary importance, and so on and so forth. Tertiary importance and down the line, you see. So therefore, when I talk about the structural arrangement, each of these components arranges itself in a pattern so that each beam has a structural significance. The structural significance of a beam is essentially the structural contribution that it makes towards the objective as a whole. Okay? Now the structural arrangement really refers to the structural significance.
Hierarchy.
Yeah, and that would be in the level of a hierarchy. Significant. Okay? You see how we go? That is the logical, analytical, logical mahalach in which to analyze how a building is done. Okay? Then finally, there's a fourth thing. You see, there's a fourth thing, which I had not mentioned. And that fourth thing is the following. That in order to achieve this objective, you have certain components in a certain structural arrangement. You see. But the truth of the matter is, there could have been a number of other possibilities. There are many ways. There are many different types of components. For example, components, the beams could be composed of different kinds of materials, many different types, in range in many different ways to accomplish the same kind of objective, really. You know, there's a lot of different variations and possibilities. So what I really want to know is, the building itself, why was it designed the way it was? I want to know the design logic. For those on computers, I think that's the word, yeah? Design logic? Mm-hmm. Okay? That's what I want to know. Why is it designed that way?
It was 4 a Y to 3.
What's that? 4 is a Y to, in a sense, 2 and 3. The design of anything. Why are the components designed the way they are, right? Why is the structure arranged that way? That's the design logic, really. The design logic really refers to components, right? And structure. This is clear to everyone? Okay. This is the mashal. What is the nimshal? The nimshal are the ideas or concepts of Torah or other things, or really any other kind of natural discipline. For example, if you have a certain system of ideas, system of ideas in a natural system of ideas, meaning that it's a system of ideas which attempts to explain events in reality. Let's say, for example, you have a certain system of ideas where there are 100 ideas. If you analyze those ideas, you will notice that those ideas themselves have certain kinds of descriptions, right? And that they arrange themselves in certain patterns. And those patterns create the whole chokhmah that we see in front of us. In other words, in any particular subject matter, there are certain ideas which are the fundamental ideas, right? There are certain ideas which are not so fundamental. They're secondary. You see? Really, what they do is kind of clarify certain issues among other ideas and so on. So ideas also have certain kinds of arrangements or patterns, you see. And the pattern of that is the whole chokhmah, the whole subject matter. Our goal, and essentially what the method attempts to do, is to take such a chokhmah, to analyze specifically what are the key ideas, or what are all the basic ideas of this particular subject matter. You see. And understand these ideas in their essences. And then number two, what is the structural arrangement of these ideas? How do these ideas come together so that they create the whole chokhmah that we see in front of us? You see? And finally, four, why? Or in what way why do these ideas look the way they do? And why are they patterned the way they are? You see?
That's already getting into the next mechanism, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned more transformation.
Yeah. Now, as it talks about what we were speaking about last week, you see, is clear to what I've said up to now, basically.
What about objectives? Did you
What's that?
explain that?
No, it doesn't apply. It's clearly over there in terms of that. Now, how do we actually go about applying this to any chokhmah itself? What we do is, in our learning, no matter what we learn, really, we come across a certain idea, you see. And the first thing that we do, I'm going to erase this now. Okay? The first thing we do is, let's say we go into a certain subject matter. For example, let's say we go into the subject matter of Moed, the Shabbos. Okay? For example, we're learning Shabbos. Now Shabbos has hundreds of ideas, basically. The first thing we do is we examine each idea and we say, what is this idea? What is it made of? What is it composed of? What exactly is the definition of it? For example, we come across the notion in Shabbos, the concept called the malacha. It says that on Shabbos, there are 39 malachas that you are not allowed to do. You are prohibited to do 39 malachas. So what we say to ourselves is, this malacha, what is a malacha? What is it? You see. What is the definition of a malacha? That's the basic idea. Okay? So, the first part, or the first aspect in our analysis, is that we analyze the component, or in this case, of the event. We analyze the entities that are involved in, for example, Shabbos. Shabbos itself has many halachas. Those halachas, as we said, are phenomena, or they're events. They are realities. When a person does a malacha on Shabbos, he does something. It's not that he just, did it and that's the end of it. If he does a malacha on Shabbos, by doing the Issa on Shabbos, he does a certain pagam in the Bria. There's certain very critical things happen. The ripple effect throughout reality as a consequence of the malacha that he did. You see. The first thing that we say to ourselves is, what is a malacha? This entity. An entity means any being, any object. What is this thing? What is this entity? And the way we understand an entity is we attempt to understand what are its characteristics. What are the characteristics of this entity? What is the characteristics of a malacha? What makes a malacha? Well, you say yourself, in order to make a malacha, right, you got to have what? You have to have three things, right? In order to make a malacha, you have to have three things. For example, you have to have somebody who does the malacha. He's a poel. The action itself, the pu'ula, and that the action is generally done to an object, the po'ul, you see. So in other words, when you analyze the specific entity, in this case a malacha, you say, what is it composed of? You see, what is this being, in this case a malacha, which is a real being in and of itself, it's a real entity. What is its nature? Well, it's made of certain kind of characteristics. You see, that's one thing we do. The second thing we do is that once we analyze many different entities, we say to ourselves, what is their arrangement? How do they connect with each other? For example, in Taurus, we have a concept called a mace. A mace, if somebody dies, a mace is matame. It's matame. Okay? Then we also have a concept called oihel. A mace is matame by oihel. It means that if a mace is in a room, anything which is in that room also becomes tameh. Now, when we analyze the concept of mace, we say, what is a mace? What is a mace? So we have to define that. What are the characteristics of a mace, for example? Well, first of all, who could be a mace? You see. Is it a man, or could be something else? Animals? You see? Number one. If it's a man, what kind of person is it? Is there a difference if it's a male, female, Jew, goy, young, old? You know what I mean? What? Right? What does it mean that he died? What part? The mace is matame. What is matame? Is the guf matame? You see? Is one eva matame? How much is being matame? You see what I'm saying? We're analyzing the entity called mace. The statement is, a mace is matame. Well, what is a mace? So we want to understand it from many different aspects. You see? What are its characteristics? So we understand exactly what the Torah means by a mace. Those are its characteristics. Another characteristic, for example, is the notion of ohel. There's something called ohel. Ohel is a specific way to give tumah. So we say to ourselves, what's the connection between a mace and ohel? What is the arrangement of those two ideas? How are they connected? When you want to know how ideas are connected, you're concerned with structure. When you want to know what the idea is in of itself, you're concerned with the entity. Do you understand clearly the differences? Now, I'm not going, and I cannot go into the specific techniques which involve in each of these stages of analysis. I just want you to understand what each of these stages require. Entity now simply means you simply take a certain concept which applies to a certain reality or being, and you say to yourself, what is the definition of this thing? What is this thing? Describe it to me. And then after you amass different concepts, and you say to yourself, what is the arrangement of these various different concepts? You see.
So that's the fire on the pole.
What's that?
That's the fire outside the net. And the oil would be the polar.
No, that's
I'm saying that would be something causes it. What does it cause? And the person that becomes Tameh, or the object that becomes Tameh, for being in the oil. Don't divide it into three separate categories.
Let me give you an example of what I mean by structure, what I mean by entity more clearly. It says, for example, that a mace is matame, right? A mace is matame, okay? Also, a zov, a matzur is matame. Matzur is someone who has skin disorders. I'm going to say it's not leprosy. Actually, it's not leprosy. A matzur is matame. A zov is matame. A sher is matame. The Torah lists different things that give tumah, and the Torah says that How is it Matame? If you touch it, if you carry it, that's Maga. If you carry it, Masa. If you're in the same room with it, Ohel, right? And that different things can be received the Tumah. What can receive Tumah? What can become Tameh? Adam, Kalim, Olchran, Mashkim, these are things which can receive Tumah. Now, each one of these things, for example, a mace, right? Maga. These are many different ideas, right? The Torah says that a mace, a zog, material shirts, all of these things can give tumah by touching it, by being in the same room with it, by carrying it. What can receive tumah? Adam, Kalim, Ochran, for example, Mashkif, right? Now, each of these things require analysis. You say, what is a sheretz? What is a sheretz? The Torah says the sheretz is in the Tameh. What is a sheretz? What does that mean? It means, where does it come from, a sheretz? What species is it? What does it mean that a sheretz died? You see. When you say a sheretz in the Tameh, are we referring to the whole sheretz, a part of it? All these are different aspects of the definition of what a sheretz is. Okay? The same thing with mace. All of these things, Mitzvah. What is the fundamental? This is an entity analysis. Kalim. Kalim can receive tumah. What are kalim? What is the fundamental definition of kalim? What should they be made of? How should they be shaped or designed? What should they be used for? Are there restrictions to these things? Each of the halachas which describe these things are essentially halachas which describe the characteristics of these things, which are entities. You see what I'm saying? In other words, instead of seeing halachas of mess are just many different halachas, what the halachas are doing, they're telling you what a mess is. They are describing the characteristics of what a mess is. You see, instead of learning all the different halachas of Kalim, there's a whole masechta called Kalim. Instead of halachas of what the masechta of Kalim really is, it's describing to you what Kalim are. It's talking about the entity called Kalim, which is a real thing, and telling you what its characteristics are. This is what the Torah calls Kalim. You see, what the Torah does not call Kalim is not Matame. You see, for example, Kalim, if they're made of stones, do not Mekabel Tumah. Okay, right? So therefore, in other words, the Torah does not, when it says Kalim, it's only talking about Kalim, which are composed materials other than stone, Klei Avonim. Klei which is made of stone is not Mekabel Tumah. So therefore, one of the, what? Because I'm not going to go into that, that's not important. The halacha of what constitutes Kalim tells me exactly what is the only being which will receive tumah. No other thing will receive tumah. It's got to be composed of a certain material. So therefore, that halacha describes to me what kalim are in reference to tumah. You see what I'm saying? That's what entity analysis is. It's simply a question. The question that we ask is, what is it? What is this thing? That's the fundamental question of entity analysis. What is this thing? That's the fundamental question. What is this thing? Now you may think this is easy to answer. This is not. You see, this is itself is a whole analytical process. There are many techniques to know when you say what is this thing. It's not that easy to describe, because a specific entity may have many different characteristics. But what you want to know is, what does each characteristic tell me about that thing? It's much more complex than it appears. But this is the first step. Once you have arranged a lot of the entities, or you know them, the next question is, how do they connect? What is their relationship? How do they interact with each other? Okay? How do they relate? Now, what's the answer answer of how do they relate here? What's the answer of that? The answer is the following. These things relate. Can anyone tell me how all these basic ideas essentially relate?
Okay.
What?
Okay.
No, all these ideas, the whole thing here.
They're all common.
Can give me what is this? Can anyone tell me this basic structure of these basic ideas? No. They all relate to Tumah V'Tara, but I want to know, can someone see some kind of a pattern in these ideas?
One won't work without the other.
What's that?
One won't work without the other.
What does that mean?
You have to have something that gives, something that takes, and an action that's done. It has to be one. It's one full system.
What's the system? What's the system?
It's a complete circuit.
What's
that one?
So what? Okay. What's the system? Structure it out. We want to know what the system is. How do they relate? What is the system? So what's the system here?
One gives the tumah, one is makabel the tumah, and
exactly. That's the system. One is a source. The other one is a recipient or makabel, right? And the masaman too is the way that you transfer. This is the transfer mode. Or what's called the vehicle, the way you transfer it. Yeah, that's it. So therefore, the structure of the system is this. The source, through a certain transfer mode, right, will give over tumah to a certain recipient. This is the structure. You see. Do you see the difference between structural analysis and entity analysis? In entity analysis, we're only concerned in knowing what each thing is. But structure knows how they're connecting. What's the story that they're telling me? What's going on among all of them? And what's going on is that certain things are called sources. They possess tumah. And in certain ways, certain conditions, certain transfer modes or vehicles, they will give over that tumah to certain other objects which will receive it. And then they will hold it. You see? You see what I'm saying? This is the structural arrangement of these ideas.
So it's like outlining the topography.
Right, it's a topography, right.
Design logic starts digging already.
No, wait, you can go right design logic. Okay?
You start getting into the reason.
Do we have this? Okay. There's a third analytical system. Each of these analytical systems have techniques, but they attempt to understand a different feature about what is going on. The third one is called variational analysis. It's a study of variation. How does one thing affect another? For example, we have seen that the structure of tumah is where you have a source, right? Through a certain transfer mode, right? Affects or will give over tumah to a certain makabel, or recipient, okay? Right? This is the structure of essentially the simple structure that we've defined. And these are the entities, there are sources, and so on. Now, we notice one thing over here. You see. If the source, for example, is a mace, or if the source, for example, is let's say, a novella, let's say a mitzvah. Okay? Both of these are sources of tumah. You see. But each source has a different transfer mode. In other words, a mace has a transfer mode of ohel, but a mitzvah does not. So what we want to know is the following. How does one idea affect the other? You see, it's more than a further breakdown. What we want to know is the variation of the thing. In other words, given a certain condition in one, it will influence a change in the condition of the other.
Variables.
Right, exactly. One change in one will affect the conditions in the other. If you change the source, you see, other things will change. You see. And for example, different sources have different transfer modes. But that's not true. What we want to know is...
Sometimes a recipient becomes transfer by the other.
Yes, there are a lot of different things. For example...
So before a major Tama person, the person was the recipient, right?
Yeah, but then you think
And then he could
We'll get into a second. I'll read that over.
I try to say what it is in the mess that because the mess is what it is.
What we simply want to know is what ideas connect to different ideas, and we want to notice the change
Of the structure.
of the change of the structure
of the whole system.
Right, the change. In other words, for example, if you take one, what happens is what we want to know is the following.
If you go right, you'll end up in this direction. If you go left,
If you change one entity in a certain way, you see, how will it affect another idea? Will it force a change in a different idea? For example, in example in Kacham.
the chain effect.
As an example, let's
What does it say with that?
stay in
It's a chain effect. No, this is a good example. Yeah.
It is when we want to know this source, right?
The source is an oichel then it's
Let's put it this way. Let's put it.
keep talking about abstract.
There's a certain idea called put it this way. 1 second. The entity analysis says there's something called a sheretz, a dov, matzura, a mace. That's what entity analysis, right? Structure tells me that these things are connected in a certain pattern. You see, that what happens is there's a pattern of source, transfer mode, recipient. That's the way the system is working. What variation wants to say is, if I change the source, you see, what happens in the transfer mode? Will there be certain halachas that will change in this part than here? So therefore what happens is we see that this halacha is affected by that halacha. You see. Or vice versa. We don't know, you see. But we want to know if you change one source, there are many different kinds of sources. You see. For example, if you go from mace to nevela, both can give tumor to masa by carrying it. You see. But if you go from mace to nevela to sheretz, a sheretz no longer has masa. You see. It doesn't include that anymore. Which means that the source is a variable. It changes. It has different kinds of values. The source can be a mace, a nevela, a sheretz, and so on, right? There are many different types of transfer modes, right? So therefore, transfer modes, there are many values to it. It's also a variable. It can change, right? The general idea of transfer mode has different examples of it, or different expressions. That can also change, right? What we want to know is, as one changes, which ideas are connected to what ideas? That's different from entity analysis. In entity analysis, we're looking at each idea in and of itself. You see. Structure arranges the ideas in a pattern. Variation attempts to study. Specifically, how changes in one are reflected in changes in the other. So that we begin to see the shifting patterns of what's going on. It's dynamic. See, the thing is, variation analysis is a dynamic study. It's a study of the movement of the system. You mean? It's a movement of the system. You find the same concept, for example, in science. You find the same concept. For example, let's say you have two variables. Let's say it's determined that the more a person weighs, the smarter he is. You see? So therefore weight is related to IQ. It's not true, but let's say it is.
Yeah, in a reverse.
Let's say that it is, right? In the law of gravity, right? Gravity, the force of gravity depends on the mass and on the distance, right?
Right.
Right? Mass is a certain concept, right? What is its value? It could be any number of values. It could be any one of numbers. Distance can be any numbers. What we want to know is, if you change mass and distance, how is the force of gravity changing? You see, these three are called variables. You see, because the central idea has many different possible expressions. In this case, the expressions are quantitative. There are many different possible numbers or values. Over here, the expression is qualitative. You see, there are many different types of sources. There are many types of transfer modes. There are many types of recipients. The Torah tells you different types. So what we want to know is, right, how does the change in one affect the change in the other? You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
We will see much better examples of this as we begin to learn. But that's the general idea. Entity analysis is simply concerned with understanding G or M or D by itself. What is the concept of distance? What is mass? In and of itself. I mean, what is the definition of mass? What's the definition of distance? You know? In and of itself. Structure wants to know, basically, how are these things connected? Meaning what? Means they're connected in a way where if you multiply the mass over the distance equals G. That's the structure of how these ideas are connected. You see what I'm saying? The product of these two divided by that is equal to this. Variation is something else. Variation means this. It's funny that if this changes, let's say, if the mass is doubled, right? How does that change the force? And so on. You see what I'm saying? It's a different aspect of the situation. That's all.
But so far, you haven't, let's say you take out a Mishnah, take a look at this is in Talmud, that's in Talmud, that's in Talmud, this is in Talmud. Then you have to look why, then start explaining, either the Gemara explains or Rashi or the Mepharshim explain what each one is. What's with them? And then it explains how each one, what the Elio, Mago, Master. So far, you're not doing anything new. That's the way you have to learn. You have to see what each thing does. It's nothing different yet. It isn't. I'm listening. I haven't seen anything different.
No, because what I'm saying is very basic.
You're putting names, so you're giving titles to things which we didn't have a title for, maybe, but fine.
Okay.
So, one patient.
You have to have patience for it. What we're doing, these things are essentially very logical, in the sense that what we're doing is we are describing or identifying different aspects of analysis. In one case, you want to analyze this thing. In another case, you want to analyze this thing. In the third case, you want to analyze that. These are different aspects of analysis of the different things. Now, it is true that to a certain degree, everyone who learns does some of these things. Yes, it's true. But all they do is some of these things. You have never performed any of these things in a rigorous way, nor are you really aware of all the ramifications of what's involved in each of these things. Of course, the logical mind does these things. But the logical mind says, well, what is this? Oh, what's the connection here? The logical mind attempts to understand this thing. But these systems are much more rigorous and precise than you would imagine. And that when you take them to a very precise level, they come up with far more information than you could suppose. For example, we understand what variation analysis is. Now, let me go one thing, and then I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, okay?
Yes.
You'll see what I mean.
One point is concerning variational analysis.
Yeah.
Would you say that variational analysis is understanding the permutations of structures?
Yeah. It's not. No, it's really the permutations. It's the permutation within the structure.
Yeah, that's
given a certain relationship. As this changed, how is this changing?
yes. Okay.
Given a certain relationship. Now, the last thing is called design analysis, right? Or what I really call reduction. Why did I call it a design? Because essentially what this does is ask or attempt to understand these three and say, why does it look the way it does? What is the sub-reality which is responsible for these upper three? What do I mean?
You understand the reason why the halakha is the way it is.
Yes. In other words, what we're saying fundamentally, why is the halacha that way? Why is the halacha that way? It means, why does, for example, he must you will see. You will see later on that it's far more. I realize what it appears to be symbolized. You will see it's far different from what you're really supposing as you really begin to critically put it. Take my word, it appears to be in certain aspects, but you will see, because the fundamental goal that you want to achieve is this. You see, these three lead to that. For example, a mace. You look at a mace, for example. What is the definition of mace, basically? What is the definition? Well, a mace is metame. When we say a mace is metame, what are we referring to? We're referring to its bones, to its skin, or we're referring to its hair, to the organs? What are we referring to? Well, that depends what the halachas are, right?
It breaks down different mace.
There are many breakdowns. Now, the shaila is, why? Why? Why is mace defined this way? Why dafka, for example, why dafka this and not that of mace? What defines, what circumscribes or restricts the entity that it functions only given this particular characteristic? That question is a question of design analysis or reduction. You see. The second thing, structural analysis. What is the structure of talis? Well, you've said before, there's a source, right? There's a transfer mode, and what? And then there's a recipient, right? Now, what about that recipient? If that recipient or makabel tumah touches something else, does it become tomei? It can, right? It can. So therefore, what happens is that this recipient itself can become a source, which then has a transfer mode, right? And affects another recipient. Correct? Isn't that the thing? So therefore, the structure of talis, you see, basically looks like that. Now, design analysis will ask on this, why does the structure appear this way? So you may say, what do you mean design? Why does it appear this way? Because it means that in actuality, talis can be composed of three different possible structural patterns. The first talks about the following. The Torah says, when a person dies, he becomes tamei. That's all. He becomes tamei. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. It means there's no other halachas from Tumah. It cannot give it anywhere else. For example, a person becomes a Matzorah. Let's say, for example, a person becomes a Matzorah. The Torah says when a person becomes a Matzorah, he becomes tamei. Can he give it over? No. He cannot transfer it. He can't. In other words, Tumah is a static state. That's how the Torah could have said. It's possible when the Torah says the following things become Tomei. A Matzorah, Zov, Zova, Nidia, Ledis, Matzorah, the whole slew. All these things become Tomei. You see. Whatever it is, it's on Torah. What are the halachas? Can they give it over? No, they can't. If they touch something with it, they can't get it over. Tomei cannot be transmitted. So then what's the nafkamina if the thing is Tomei? Well, the nafkamina is, if someone's Tomei, for example, he can't go to a certain place. He can't go into Beit HaMikdash. But not that he can give Tumah, he can't eat certain things. He can't do certain things. That's all. Those are the halachas.
That would throw Mesa out of the category.
What?
That would throw Mesa out of the category.
No, it wouldn't. Because it means you can't take a dead body in a certain area.
Why not? If you can't transfer the Tumah, why can't you?
Because it can't, because in some way it can't. That's not relevant. I don't care what the halacha would look like. We can create a halacha. It's hypothetical. We don't. It's not important what the halacha would look like. All I'm simply saying, it's conceivable that Tumah would have been a static state. The Torah says that when something happens, this thing becomes Tomei. What does it mean that becomes Tomei? It means that there are certain things which are restricted. Or whatever it is. Whatever it is. Doesn't matter. That's it. That's Tumah V'Taharis.
There's a lot of things that can transmit the Tomei. If it's Tumah by them,
it's still Tomei.
Truma and all
Yeah. That's so the Torah could have.
The thing is, you can't eat it. But it's saying
But the Torah would have said that. Instead, the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says that these things which have tumah can actually transmit this thing. So therefore, we advance from the concept of tumah being static to tumah being dynamic. It could move. This is a structural enhancement. This is a new concept. You see what I'm saying? The fact that the Torah says that a tumah is no longer static, for example, Kedusha is static. A kedusha is static. Something which is kodesh, for example, doesn't give over kedusha to anyone else. A korban doesn't give over truma. If truma touches something, it doesn't become kodesh. You understand what I'm saying?
So in other words, what you're saying is that the source itself has sometimes a design of static or being dynamic, depending on what level it is.
No, depending on what the Torah said about it.
Right. But okay.
Why do you call it a structural enhancement rather than just a characteristic? That's, you know.
In other words, what we see is that kedusha, for example, kedusha is static. You see, it remains where it is. It can't be transmitted to someone else. In other words, when the Torah says that tumah is not static like kedusha, but tumah is dynamic. It means that tumah can be given over to something else. So, which means that tumah can be transmitted, and therefore something can actually receive it. Well, do you understand what I'm saying? So tumah is dynamic. It can move from place to place. Now that's a chiddush. That is a structural chiddush. That tells me, the system, the way it's working. You see, it's very important to observe. That is a chiddush. That's a structural. The system, the way it's working. You see, it's very important to observe. That is a chiddush. That's a structural enhancement. The structure of a static state is very different than the structure of a dynamic state. You see, it's totally different laws. It's a different phenomena, different series of events. You see what I'm saying? Now, the fact that this can receive, can this thing give over? Is that automatically can give over? No. Who says? Who says? It's possible for the Torah to have said, wait a minute, tumah can be transmitted and received. But who says that something, a receiver, can transmit also? Who says that a recipient could be makal, could be give? In other words, to be a mushba is a different thing than to be a mashpia. They have different qualities, right? The quality of being a mushba is very different than the quality of being a mashpia. Isn't that true? So who says just because this thing can receive it, it has the quality to be a kabul tumah? There are certain things in the item itself which allows it to have tumah affix itself to it. But who says that has the ability to project it out? No one said that. But the Torah says. The Torah says that here's a two, that a makabel can actually become a source itself. But that is a new structural addition. So see, not only is tumah dynamic, but tumah is multi-dynamic. In a sense, right? That it's capable of moving from level to level. That's what I mean by structural analysis. Structural analysis attempts to look at the whole system and say, what is going on here? What is the system? Design analysis is to understand this. Why does this system look the way it does? This system could have been anything. You see, it could have been a system where it was static. It could have been dynamic only or multi-dynamic. Each one says something entirely different about the system. You see what I'm saying? It's a total different statement about the system. So, what reduction attempts to do is ask the question and then answers it. It says the following. It says the reason why structure of the system is multi-dynamic is because of the nature of tumah itself. There's something about tumah which can be done. What about tumah? That remains to be understood. You see what I'm saying? But in other words, what it says is that the structure or the way the system is operating, the phenomena or the flow of tumah, is determined by the fundamental sub-reality of what tumah is itself. You see what I'm saying?
The why.
The why of tumah.
Why is it sometimes made easier? Let's say by tumah, the Torah just tells you that this is tumah, this is tumah. Let's say by Shabbos.
Yeah.
The Torah says that you should rest. That what is the reason for the malachas? Because it's supposed to be tannic. And all these malachas are going away from tannic. It's work, let's say. And they use the malachas HaMishkan or whatever, but you know that the basic reason is tannic. So you can go, that's the why. And from there you can go on, and this is a malacha, that's a malacha, so you know the why. You start off with knowing the why. Well, other things you don't know any why at all. Some of you don't know why.
You don't really know the why. That's not true. You think you know the why. The why of reduction. You said why I call reduction? Because remember the cone, we reduced the cone down. Remember that? That's why it's called reduction. Really. I can
But didn't you go one step further by Shabbos and by... You know that a malacha, what's the reason that a malacha is a malacha? Because it's not a time.
It must be. It must be because even, for example, I'll give you an example. Like what I'm talking about here. What's design? This is the deepest of all things. Remember, this is what I have to do. This is the explanation. This is where it's at. But you cannot reach this level until you understood this. The designer now has to understand why of entity. Why these entities? Why do they look the way they do? Why are they arranged in this way? Why do they vary in this particular pattern? You see, so the design analysis is the cone. You see, when we try to explain it, and the design analysis will attempt to explain this in terms of its sub-reality, to understand the nature of Tum itself. You see, now for example, in the Malachas of Shabbos, for example, there are many Malachas of Shabbos. Why does the Malacha look the way it does? So you say, what does it mean it looks the way it does? Yeah? If you subject it to these different analyses, you will see that a Malacha has certain kind of characteristics. There's a pole, and there's a pole, and there's certain components that attach to it. For example, a malach is in a particular gufa. Some chayav and so on. Why? Can you tell me why? When one Tana holds chayav, one chayav is potter, he's telling you something about the innate nature of a malach itself. What is the concept of an activity? You see, he's defining an activity involves these elements. And another Tana, like Rav Shimon says, it involves these elements. What each one is really saying is that they define the nature of an activity in a totally different sense. So it's not so simple to say, well, it has to do with a tainug. I mean, what do you mean a tainug? It's not that simple.
I know, but I'm saying there's a reason at the end. You know the reason at the end.
The end is the reduction.
But you know the reason, now you have to work in the structure and say, why is this, this not. But basically, in the end, you come in because Moshe and Tzrichel Gufa, if you did a certain malacha, that you weren't really doing the work because you didn't really need it, so therefore it wasn't really doing the work. By someone we actually don't know. Why is there someone? We don't know. I mean, unless we'll come to a...
Yeah, but one thing you see deeper, he's saying that's true, we're saying, but why is it mentioned the time on the first?
Yeah, but we don't know that. Well, we don't know.
That's you know something.
That's a different level.
It just appears that you do. As soon as you begin to analyze what it is, you see suddenly all the things begin to fall apart. That's why what I was saying before, that even though each of these methods have certain things that you already done, when you apply these methods in their entirety, you see a totally different picture emerging. For example, like Tumah V'Tahara. This is analysis that I gave, essentially. No matter how much you learn Tumah V'Tahara, you will not come up with this kind of analysis. I don't care if you learn the entire Mishnayos of Tumah V'Tahara, and you know all the halachas involved, you will not begin to understand what I've just described, or be able to answer it. You would not even begin to notice that, wait a minute, it could be static, because you won't look at it in that way. You're not going to look at Taurus in terms of its structure, in terms of the fluctuation of structure, or the different types of structure. You see, and try and attach the different way of structures on to the different, essence of Tum itself. You won't think along those lines. Why? Because you're not thinking in terms of phenomena. You don't realize that all the halachas of Torah are phenomena, and they're determined by their sub-phenomena, and so on. You see what I'm saying? This kind of analysis is a different type of thing, and it's more than just svara. Later on, when we get into it, so on, in Yeshiva, in the world, there's a concept called a svara. Give a svara something. There's no room for svara here. Everything must be logically connected to the things and must flow. It must be generated directly from something as a direct necessity. You see, in that kind of sense, these questions that I'm asking are structural questions here. Why are there? How do you begin to answer this kind of question? How do you even begin to answer this kind of question? The truth is, you really can't, unless you are familiar with these analytical systems. You can't even approach this kind of question. Now that you wouldn't even begin to ask this question. But this question makes sense now because of the last few weeks. That's why suddenly you understand it, and it makes not only sense. It's a very powerful question. The Rebbe designed Taurus in a certain way. All the halachas of Tumah V'Tahara is a design. He designed the phenomena, you see, which in this case we see in the flow. The phenomena called flow has a certain flow pattern, and the Rebbe designed it in a certain way. Why? I mean, why? We don't want to know why he had the kavanah. What determines this phenomena? What is it about Tumah itself? What is Tumah? And what is it about Tumah itself such that when it does manifest itself in reality, it comes out in reality as a flow pattern, being multi-dynamic? That's the question. Does everyone understand what I'm saying?
We'll never understand each entity itself.
Fundamentally, if you apply these methodologies itself, if you're familiar with all the techniques, and you know how to apply these things, you can obtain answers to these things.
You cannot understand the phenomena itself.
You mean why the Ganesh did it?
Right, you cannot understand the entity, why a mass it has an entity, giving off a Tameh.
No,
and
you can see the inner necessities, how these things too.
Well, won't design analysis lead you back down to the next level down, entity analysis, structural analysis, and the cone's going to get more close.
Well, that's the cone. What the cone does, it leads you down. Remember the cone?
The end point's going to be...
The cone, that's what I meant. Up here, that's what I meant. Remember last week? Up here you see three entities, X, Y, and Z. And you see that they're related in this way. Right? Remember? That's what I'm talking about over here. We see two of the towers that relate in this way. You have a source, the transfer modes, the recipient, and so on. Now you say why? What determines these entities, X, Y, and Z? That's entity analysis. Why are they shaped this way where X determines Y, Y, and Z, and Z? That's structure analysis. And if Y changes, so you have Y sub A, then Z changes to Z sub C. Why? You mean? There are fluctuations. And the extract lies on the next level where you have, for example, A and B. In other words, the reason why this system flows like that is because there are two other entities called A and B which have never been identified. You see? And having identified them, they relate in this way, and because of that, this thing determines or generates that. Now, where does A and B exist? And this is the thing. The surface level of Torah, you understand? The surface level of Torah, meaning that when you learn all the halachas, have many entities. Those are called stated entities. They're stated entities because they're stated. You know what? For example, a source, a matama, is a stated entity. A mace is a stated entity. All these are stated entities and so on. But there's something called an implied entity. An implied entity is not stated at all. But when you analyze it, entity analysis, and you go through these things, you begin to understand or generate new entities that you've never seen before. Now you say, how is that possible?
Is there a
No. You will see. Because you begin to become aware of entities that you've never seen before, that are right underneath, and that are not clear, they're not there. And it's those entities which are hidden, really, that really are the fundamental things of what's going on. And these entities are fundamentally even fewer than this. For example, O and P, you see. But you cannot get to O and P until you get to A and B. And you can't get to A and B until you clearly understand this. But to clearly understand this, you must understand 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3 are the steps which will take you to 4, to A and B. You see what I'm saying? So what we see, therefore, is continuous transformation of structure. The structure is transforming so that there are fewer and fewer entities, and the structural patterns become simpler and simpler. You see what I'm saying? That's what it means, that the nature of Chokhmah is what's called a vertical transformation. You know, there's a continuous, and it's vertical, it goes down. And I call it reduction because you're reducing it further and further down. The further down you go, the fewer the entities become, the more simple they become. And their arrangements totally change. To use the example we used last week, Newton was only concerned with the relationship between the entities of mass, force, and distance. He didn't know any other entities, really. You see, Einstein came along and said there are other entities. There's an entity called space, or mathematical space, which is changing. Or let's say, for example, or another entity called time, space, continue, whatever the story is. Einstein introduced new concepts, new realities that Newton was not even aware of. Newton never heard of a time-space continuum. What is that entity called a time-space continuum? What he does? You see what I'm saying? What Einstein introduced was a new entity. It's a new aspect of reality, which is there. And it's that aspect of reality, which, and its relationship, which is literally determining the outer aspects of reality.
And the ultimate end point will be when you understand. At that point, we have the.
Does everyone understand what I've said to now? You understand what I'm saying to now?
The first one we develop Kodesh Baruch, it's a little end point. It's called one of the times, it's not revealed. Bottom of the column.
Okay, I'm gonna hold it. Okay, what we've done basically till now is to. No, basically, like we've said, with the method, we discussed several aspects. We discussed the notion, the fundamental premise of the method, that all halachas are events or phenomena. They are real or being. All events are phenomena. All halachas are phenomena or events. And we said that once you see that they're phenomena, they are real. They are therefore subject to a certain kind of understanding, where we say we want to understand, we want to explain these events called halachas. Just like scientists attempt to explain the events in physical reality. Now, there's one more thing I want to do, and we described last week how the method is done. The notion of entity analysis, to examine what the entities are in the system. Number two, what the structure analysis. How do these entities relate? Number three, variation. How do they affect each other and cause changes? And number four, reduction analysis or design analysis. Why do they look the way they do? What is responsible for the whole system the way it is? Now, I'm not clear at this point. How many of you understand what I've said in the last four shurim? I don't know. I haven't spoken to you. I would like to take our time to speak to you more individually, or get some kind of idea really what it is, and I would like to do that hopefully soon. Not a question. I just want to find out what the general feeling is. This is hashkafa is what do you call it? Is one thing. The method is it's somewhat different. It's also it's abstract. I'm not clear how each one is understanding what I've said, and I ultimately each one after a couple of weeks we will have to decide. We have two shurim here. We have hashkafa and we have the method shurim. The hashkafa, I think, is probably for everyone, basically, whoever understands it. The method shurim, depending on the individual, may be too advanced for some, or whatever have you. We will have to decide on our own what it is, and so on. So we'll see what the thing is. But when we begin to learn inside, we will begin to see what the method is like. Then we're going to really put our fingers on it. The last thing I want to talk about the method tonight is what's called the phenomenological systems. Or to make it easy, the event system. Somebody asked me last week. Who asked me last week? Oh, you did, Yechiro. Does the method apply to everything in Torah? And that's what I want to talk about today. What does the method apply to? Well, the method applies to anything which the Banishim did. That's the answer. Whatever Maisa